All right, time for the main event. In this corner, you got Dr. Richard Dick Wolf. And on this corner, you got some chuckle fuck. Let's fight.
That if the rich get richer, everybody else gets marginally richer as well, even if the wealth gap widens. Is that true based on your observation?
No, that's not true. Let me give you a simple example.
Oh, that is true. That's the facts.
No,
Those are the facts.
Here's the facts. From 1970.
Old man slap fight. Old man slap fight. It's time for an old man slap fight.
70s, middle 1970s to pretty much now, the real wage in the United States has gone nowhere. It's a stagnant line, goes like this. If you average it out, it's between 1/4 and 0.5% per year, which is a statistical nothing. Meanwhile, the productivity.
That's wrong.
Good Lord, is the man on the right dead? I mean, he's close. Dude's like the guy who invented trickle-down economics. Jimmy Dore looks terrible. Yeah, hatred ages a motherfucker.
The productivity of the worker has gone straight up in a line of 1 to 2% across that time.
That's not true.
But productivity is what the worker gives the employer.
Oh shit, Fast Walker. I just saw that you gifted 5 tier 1 subs. That must have been while I was doing poop in the bathroom. Thank you very, very much. Hopefully these subs will help repair the emotional damage. True. Though it appears you did not get all of the white names. Some still remain. Grazing peacefully in the wilds. I'm real excited for this debate. I know that economics is like boring shit to a lot of people, but this is gonna be spicy.
Wage is what the
your facts
employer.
are incorrect, Richard. Your facts are incorrect. Please, under Kennedy, where we had the big tax cuts there, median wages went way up for workers during that period. Now, when we had Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, they didn't. You're very right there, but you can't clop all these things together as one thing. The productivity growth under Reagan was much higher than it was under Carter or under Lyndon Johnson or under these others. You've got to look at what actually happened.
Welcome back, Sophie.
You can't just collapse them all.
Their time will come.
No way. Productivity growth under Kennedy and under Reagan was much, much higher than the other ones. And it was much higher under Donald Trump as well. You've got to look at what happens, not what you like to happen.
Winners, losers. As somebody with a degree in English literature, I feel that on a deep and instinctual level. You have my sympathy. Who are we watching? We are watching our hero, Dick Wolf. Dr. Dick Wolf. And demolish a fool, a simpleton, a buffoon, the guy responsible for the Laffer curve, the guy responsible for trickle-down economics. This is basically like, for me, this is like a legendary boxing match, and I'm so excited.
And what you
I agree.
You've got to not blow it. You got to go hit me with the numbers. Let's get the yearly data on productivity, and I'll just show you the facts and hope you concede the position that you're wrong.
I'm very honored today to be hosting a debate between two great economists on the merits of capitalism versus socialism. How do we create a more prosperous economy? Is there an ideal or optimal economic system to achieving that goal? How does a nation solve the problem of income inequality? And should we tax the rich?
Okay, but I also really want to know, as a nation, how do we solve a problem like Maria, okay? No one's ever answered that question, and frankly, I'm still upset that The Sound of Music didn't answer that question at any point throughout the entire runtime of the film.
And redistribute wealth to the poor. These are issues and topics we'll be discussing with Arthur Laffer and Richard Wolf. Arthur Laffer, currently chairman of Laffer Associates, is an economist who served on Ronald Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board. Widely considered the father of supply-side economics, he is well known for the Laffer curve, a theory that states there is an optimal tax rate that could optimize tax revenues for the government. Richard.
By the way, in case any of you don't know what the Laffer curve is, this is basically it. In a nutshell, the idea being, oh... yeah, It's dumb. I'm sure they'll touch on it in a much better way than I can. And let's just go on.
Wolf is the co-founder of Democracy at Work and the professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He is a renowned economist who is currently a visiting professor of the New School University in New York and has previously taught at Yale, City College of the City of New York, and the University.
That's so fucking dumb. Yeah, I mean, like, basically the idea being that if you tax at 0%, you get zero tax revenue, and if you tax at 100%, you get zero tax revenue. So the ideal rate is somewhere in the middle here, which is just a way of displacing tax burden onto working class people. Just in case you didn't pick that up. Anyway,
University of Paris, Sorbonne. His work features an approach to political economy associated.
He looks like an insane Orville Redenbacher. Well, didn't you know Orville Redenbacher was a German count during World War II?
With the Marxist school of thought. Gentlemen, I've had the privilege of speaking with both of you individually, and it's an absolute honor and treat to have both of you together to discuss some very important issues. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you as well.
Let's start with the first question that perhaps we can both make opening statements for, which is how to solve the problem of the underperformance of the U.S. economy, assuming that there is an underperformance, and I'll let you both address this assumption and perhaps the solutions to this problem. Professor Wolf, I'll let you start first.
Okay. I'm not sure what one would mean by underperformance. There were clearly periods of time when the United States economic engine was purring along very, very well. I would argue that particularly after our Civil War, the economy took off in a remarkable way. Before the Civil War, it was an economy heavily dependent on a very few items for its economic growth, mostly cotton from the slave South and so on, some development of manufacturing in the North. But it was really after the clash between the capitalist system of the North and the slave system of the South, defeating the slavery, destroying that economy, basically by depriving the slave owners of their property, to wit, slaves. You then had uniform capitalism taking over in the South as well as expanding in the North, and the American U.S. capitalist system took off. And it at first had to struggle, among other countries, within the larger global framework of the British Empire. By the end of the 19th century, it had established itself as the successor empire. The only possible alternatives or competitors were Germany and Japan. World War I took care of Germany. World War II took care of Japan. And you were left with the period after World War II when the United States basically was king of the hill and took off in a remarkable way. Through most of that period, at least the last century, but probably a bit more, you could say that U.S. capitalism was not underperforming. It was performing extraordinarily well. It delivered to the American working class a century of rising real wages, at least until the 1970s, when that stopped. But for most of the period before that, you had a capitalism that was exemplary. It gave to the American people the idea they.
Well, I think he's about to explain why wages haven't gone up in 30 years. I think he's getting there, Catalina Gearbox. Let him cook. Let him cook.
Lived in a charmed universe. If they
Let
were
that stew
religious,
simmer.
they thanked God for all of that. If they weren't religious, they thanked the capitalist economic system for carrying them not only big profits, but rising real wages. Okay, in the 1970s, that happy story came to an end. And it's very important to understand that if you want to look at a period of underperformance, well, then the 1970s into the 80s is the inflection point. It's when U.S. capitalism stopped.
Yeah, literally, guys, I need you to understand. I need you to understand what he's talking about here in the 70s and into the 80s. He's talking about the economic policy that this guy, like, popularized under Nixon. This is the guy. This is the guy responsible for fucking all of you over with his bad economic ideas. God, this is there's a certain amount of catharsis in this for me. This guy is what, like, stagnated wages for 30 years. This is the guy. Oh, so you're telling me he's evil? Yeah. It turns out your basic applications of white people phrenology is on this guy as evil. You're correct. Yes.
Stopped being the engine of spectacular economic growth and became instead a laggard, a society that wasn't growing anywhere near as fast relative.
I love this because all of this is going to be Richard Wolff throwing shade directly at this guy and, like, holding him to, like, the train tracks, you know? This is great.
To others, as had been the case. So what is going on in these last 40 to 50 years is a radical reorganization of the world economy. The United States was the successor to the British Empire. After World War II, it was the American Empire, no longer the British Empire. And Britain is a fantastic show for what happens when you lose your empire. Britain is now well along in returning to its original status of being a cold, wet, offshore island to the continent of Europe. And if the United States is not careful, it is going to reproduce that sad story. It is well underway already. What happened? Well, what happened, very briefly, is that the United States exported, because it was profitable to industry, much of its manufacturing sector. The last 50 years, the percentage of American workers in manufacturing has gone from 30% plus to 10% plus. I mean, a spectacular hollowing out of the manufacturing base of this economy. It likewise found much more profitable investment opportunities outside the United States than inside, and it took ample advantage of that, making the United States less of an attractive place in which to do business. The wages are...
Economics is just a rich man pissing off his tower.
True. And you know what? That piss doesn't even reach you. It evaporates before it hits the ground.
The rest of the world were lower. The government regulations in many cases were fewer or could be purchased to be reduced. I won't say bribery because that's a bad word, but we all know, I hope, what I'm talking.
Yeah, one thing I like about Richard Wolff is that he actually knows his history. You know, so he's able to basically draw a beeline from, like, the establishment of, like, the transatlantic slave trade, which is basically where a lot of people kind of codify the beginning of, like, modern capitalism, right? And he's able to draw that line all the way to the present day, which is hard to do in an accessible way, and I think he does a really good job of it, right? And, like, on top of that, you have, like, the difficulty of just explaining to a lot of Americans that, like, yeah, the slave trade that served the Americas was really where all of this got nailed down, this capitalism thing. Because prior to that, it had been kind of a proto-capitalism, a mercantilism, but mercantilism was really more predicated on the idea that states needed to hoard material wealth. So it was kind of a proto-capitalism, but it was organized around a different kind of priority than the maximizing of profit.
Talking about. And then we had society.
Yeah, yeah. Also, this is great. I'm loving this because Richard Wolff got real weird during the pandemic, and now I feel like he's beginning to normalize again, and this is nice.
Societies around the world, because the world is not governed by the United States, wasn't even back in the 70s. We have countries around the world eager to bring in the investment, eager to become the next phase of economic development, eager to enter into the growth period that the United States has to now look at as part of its past history. And most important among them is the People's Republic of China. Over the last 30 years, its GDP has grown 2 to 3 times more per year than that of the United States. That is an incredible
I have not,
record.
Micah.
This country, one of the poorest on earth in the middle of the 20th century, is contesting with the United States, as I speak, for the dominant position in the world. That's an unbelievable record of economic growth. I'm not arguing pro or con China. I'm talking about the factuality of what economic growth has achieved in a society that was the largest by population, that isn't particularly well versed in resources. Final point. I don't want to monopolize the time and take it away from my colleague Art Laffer. China calls itself socialism with Chinese characteristics. It is one kind of socialism because it mixes together private enterprise, both Chinese and foreign, and government-owned and operated enterprise. That's one kind of socialism, powerful coordination from the top by a communist party.
Now, I would say that I think Richard Wolff is a bit off when it comes to his assessment of current-day China. My take on this is that a lot of the economic growth and development in China has been due to its adoption of capitalist economic policies for its, economic free zones. This is not... I don't think it's an... I think it might have been an accurate reflection of China growing 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't know about now, right? Because a lot of the growth that we're seeing is not really attributable to the socialist practices going on within China right now. Yeah, like there's a lot of state capitalism going on. One of the quibbles I have with Richard Wolff is like he tends to call all forms of socialism, or all forms attributed to socialism, I think would be a better way of saying it. Where he'll say like, oh, it's socialism with Chinese characteristics, And yeah, exactly. State-controlled capitalism isn't socialism, in my view, right? It's just capitalism with slightly different priorities, but those priorities serve the state, not the working class, which is, I think, a very key distinction. How is social credit not in line with socialism? It's in the name. Touché.
Scandinavia, West Germany, France, that's another kind of socialism. It's a private capitalism with heavy government intervention.
See, this is the other thing. Like, I disagree with him on him attributing to Scandinavia socialism, because, like, they have, like, a more socialized economy due to, like, union pressure and union organizing, but that's not a socialist system. That's like a socialism, but in shades of gray, because like not the workers don't directly control any of their workplaces. They merely have negotiating power that enables them to get better conditions, but it's not ownership of the workplace.
In Soviet Union, not with us anymore, was the government taking over most. Socialism used to be thought of as the government stepping in, but that's old socialism.
That's kind of true, but that people who thought of it that way were wrong. They were like thinking of it in propagandistic terms. Like the original socialism was worker ownership of the means of production. And you had two different ideas, and I know that he knows that because he's talked about this before. But you had revolutionary socialism and evolutionary socialism. Revolutionary being we need to overthrow the government and then institute our reforms from the top down, versus evolutionary, which is building up a base of support and then adopting those reforms via democratic pressure. So I know he knows the difference because he said that as much. I think maybe he's trying to play to Laffer here. I'm not exactly sure where he's going with this.
And that's not where socialism is going now. Now the focus of socialism, partly out of a self-critique, is to change the organization of the producing unit, the enterprise, from a top-down hierarchical system to one based on democracy at the workplace, or what you might want to call worker co-ops. That, the argument of socialists now goes, is a better foundation to overcome the problems of capitalism
you're from my homeland
than any other available alternative. Let me stop there.
Okay, lots to unpack later. Dr. Laffer, I'll let you respond to the same question. So how to solve the problem of the underperformance of the...
Yeah, it could be playing to the audience here because, like, I get the impression from the moderator that this channel is much more about capitalism than it is socialism, so yeah.
U.S. economy, if you indeed think that the U.S. economy is underperforming per your definition.
I do believe it is underperforming, and I think to really understand the way to solve or to describe that underperformance is to see why it occurred. And I agree with Professor Wolf very much on a lot of the development there. And in fact, the whole concept of economic surplus is one of Marxist derivation. He and I both shared a professor long ago and far away, in Professor Paul Baran, whose specialty was economic growth and the vent for surplus in the quid pro quo system. And you know what you found is
oh yeah, Fenry, I have seen the stories about Elon Musk impotently trying to break all the unions in Sweden at once, which is great. I love when he flails like a child. Born here? No, I wasn't born in Sweden, but like my family history, like my dad's parents were both from Sweden, and my dad is 100% Swedish. As a result, my mom is like a half Swedish, so there's a lot of Swede in me. What can I say?
The capitalism did, in fact, provide the prosperity that he says it did. It did so by using price systems, the quid pro quo system there. It created economic growth, an enormously prosperous world. That prosperous world, I think, stopped really in 1930. I would say the Great Depression was the first real clear chink in the whole system of economic...
Whoa. Close it up, folks. He's dropping slurs. I didn't realize this was a kill stream.
Economics, and it wasn't because of capitalism failing. The 1930s was a failure of government, not of capitalism. This is when government went way beyond the role.
What? The 1930s was a failure of... No. Economic crashes are endemic in capitalism. You can't not have them in capitalism because capitalists seek to undo any regulations that might prevent them. What?
It should play in an economy. There is a major role in a capitalist system for government. You need to have taxes. What you need is a low rate, broad-based
That's true, winners and
tax.
losers.
You need spending restraint. You need sound money. You need minimum regulations, and you need free trade. And all those are areas where government should protect the economy and
No, I don't. Sorry, to clarify, I don't think he was actually trying to do a racism. Okay, I was making a joke.
allowed those exchanges to occur without monopoly developing, without the private sector destroying its own prosperity. And if you look at it, I mean, let's just say in the beginning, prior to 1913, when the income tax was put into the United States, I think total government spending as a share of GDP was less than 3%. Government was funded almost entirely by a broad-based flat tariff, not a protective tariff, but a revenue tariff. We had the sale of lands. We had some taxes on sins. I think the alcohol tax that was primarily the way government funded itself.
You know, communitisish. I don't know how to say your username. I'm so sorry, but yeah, I think I could agree with what you're saying. Yeah, what you're saying. Sorry.
And it did its role very well, and the U.S. exceeded all expectations. It became the number one in the world. The Great Depression, we raised the highest marginal income tax rate from 24% to 94% in 1944. We destroyed the system. We huge increases in government.
Oh, taxes on sins. That's a reference to like sin taxes, like taxes on cigarettes, alcohol, condoms, etc. You know, the products that would lead to vice.
Spending, and of course a military venture that was just outrageous beyond belief. And that was really where government became too large. And right now, government is way, way, way too large and is inhibiting the capitalist system from really expanding wealth, prosperity, and jobs for all. And this is why I think we've had the failure, is because of too much government and because of bad policies on taxes, spending, monetary policy, regulatory policy, and trade policy. Those are the five kingdoms of macroeconomics. And if the government were to retract back to where it should be, as we tried to do under the Reagan administration, I think we could recreate that long-term prosperity with a capitalist system without having to have a...
Oh yeah, it's a common thing in the Midwest, Fenry.
A Marxist or socialist takeover. I think Professor Wolf and I do agree very much on the failure of redistribution of the Keynesian, what he called the European socialist model. That system has failed terribly, and we need to get away from that system totally. And I think we both agree that that system is awful, and just it's the difference in where we go in the future that really discriminates between what his view and what my view are. I think we need to have low-rate, broad-based flat taxes in private sector, and he would like to see much more government control of the means of production. And with that, I think we both have the same view of the underperformance and different views of how to solve it.
Dr. Wolf, I'll let you respond to that. Do you agree that the government is too large per Dr. Laver's analysis?
Well, let me try to underscore the difference here. I'm going to exaggerate, but I want to make the point. I don't find it terribly exciting anymore to debate whether the government's role is too large or too little. Partly that's because I don't see the government as an independent actor in this drama. I see our government here in the United States, as I see most governments, heavily shaped, influenced, controlled by, in a capitalist system, the captains of industry, the corporate titans, whatever you want to call them. I don't see the government as an independent actor. When Dr. Laffer says, correctly in my view, that in the 1930s, the government came in a massive way, I say absolutely. And the reason is that private capitalism collapsed and was facing the very socialist revolution that is their worst nightmare. Because, you know...
Yeah, no, I predict this entire debate is a bloodbath. I feel like Richard Wolff is like the guy who's been training his entire life for this specific moment.
Remember, the 1930s isn't that many years later than 1917, when that revolution happened in Russia that frightened them all. And they were terrified. And they brought the government in to bail them out, which is what it did. Just like in 2008 and 9, when we had the so-called Great Recession, they brought in the government to bail them out. The government has been bailing out capitalism for quite some time.
True.
Because capitalism, if I had the time I would take to do this, is a very unstable system. When I teach my classes, I lean across the podium and I say to my students, if you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. But you live with a capitalism from which, at least so far, you can't see an escape. So I'm not interested in the debate between private and the government. Strikes me when I look at factories in Russia and I looked at factories here in the United States, for the average worker, it doesn't make all that much difference whether the board of directors is elected by the shareholders or whether it's put in place by the government apparatus or by a political party. The basic relationship of the worker to the work process isn't all that different. Therefore, for me, the way forward is to look at the problem that we have not faced, which is the way we organize the workplace. We give a tiny group of people,
we organize
board of
labor,
directors, major
Laffer.
shareholders, owner-operator, an extraordinary power. These are not elected people. These are not democratically responsible people. They decide what the price of the product will be, what the technology is, what they will produce, and they decide what to do with the surplus produced by the army of employees who have to live with the result. My basic argument, and I believe the argument of socialism in the 21st century, will be that organization is the problem. And we have to be able and willing as a society to question that organization rather than to assume it's the best, the latest, the best human beings can do, and then argue about whether the government should do more or less. I'm not interested. I think that's a lower priority than this fundamental question, which we in capitalism have evaded for most of the history of the capitalist system. And last point, that's what the slaves and the slavery did, and that's what feudalism did. They argued over lots of questions, but they didn't question until it was too late.
Basically, what he's talking about here is that we've questioned a lot of different aspects about capitalism in order to try and fix this recurring problem of economic crashes, and yet we haven't questioned the fundamental premise of capitalism itself, how labor is organized, right? And that tends to be exactly the problem that we're looking at with capitalism. The issue is the private ownership of the means of production as opposed to the worker ownership of the means of production. That's the fundamental thing that has gone unquestioned deliberately for so long in America to protect corporate interests. I thought it was about making people's lives better. It is, right? But worker ownership of the means of production does make workers' lives better, because workers then prioritize their own well-being. The workers prioritize themselves, which means that they get better pay, they get better working conditions, they get better, they get more stability, they get they get to be their own bosses. And that fundamentally changes their relationship with ownership, right? Because they are now receiving, about as close to the maximum they can get of the value of their labor. And they're able to make decisions about what is done with their labor. They're able to have some degree of freedom within the workplace to run the workplace as they see fit. And all these things improve their level of happiness.
The very relationship in production of master-slave, of lord and serf. Well, we ought to be questioning employer-employee. Has that system run out? stop being an engine of growth and become the obstacle we have as a new generation to overcome.
Dr. Laffer, I'll let you respond to that before we move on to the next point.
Sure. Let me, if I can, respond. I think the Great Depression started with the
Exactly.
Smoot-Hawley tariff, which passed the Senate and the House in 19.
Can I call you Mutzer? Would that be okay? Or Partey? Would that be acceptable? What's a good short version of your username that I can use?
1929 was signed into law in 1930. If you look at my book, Taxes Have Consequences, you'll see that it was clearly that. The 20s had provided enormous prosperity, full employment, great prosperity. Capitalism worked wonderfully well then. And then it was the government imposition of that tariff that started. The response was Herbert Hoover raising the highest marginal income tax rate from 24%, as I said, to 94%.
Thanks, Dr. Fell.
And just perpetuated that. That,
whatever
to me,
you want?
was
Okay.
government that caused that problem, and capitalism could have solved it, but in fact, government just took over and ruined it. Let me
Kumu?
go to the example
Okay, I can
of
do
China
Kumu.
that he put in. I was the first American to go to China in modern times. I went in October of 1970 with George Shultz and John Ehrlichman.
Yeah, because there was nobody in China until 1970. Fun fact. My grandfather was a flying tiger in China, so I know that this guy is full of shit, because there were plenty of Americans in China, all right, fighting behind enemy lines in order to keep the Japanese from being able to take over China, all right? There were Americans in China, like, throughout the last century. There wasn't like a huge period of time when Americans could not be there or were not there. Yeah, my grandfather was a flying tiger in China. They invited him over there like several times over the decades.
I was in the Nixon White House at the time, just before Kissinger's trip. At that time in 1970,
You want to see my
China,
outfit full screen?
93% of all Chinese production
one
went through
second.
state-run enterprises. They were a hermit kingdom. They had an horrible currency, everything. From 1970, they took state-run operations from 93% down to less than 10%. That's called a tax cut. And they really reduced the amount of industry that went through state-run enterprises from 93 to about a little less than 10%. They hooked the yuan to the U.S. dollar in 1992. They outsourced monetary policy to Alan Greenspan. Inflation stopped, bang. They expanded trade enormously. They went from the hermit kingdom to a wide open export market. That's free trade. The three pillars here are tax cuts, sound money, and free trade. And China grew, and I mean
Thank you,
China
Fenry.
grew. China grew in real output per adult by about 66-fold.
Trans Girl Jade, I got this from American Eagle, which surprisingly has cute girl clothes. I just thought of it as like a jeans place, but they have a cute but small selection of lady clothing.
During this period, the U.S. grew by about 4-fold. So you can see how the Chinese system really, really worked. And I believe it's because of capitalism, because of free markets that caused the Chinese enormous growth. I'm a huge fan of China, a big advocate. But then with Xi coming in the last 5 or 6 years, the state run has now come back into power. Chinese growth, I think, is over. I think China's on a death spiral coming down because of government intervention in destroying the free markets there. So to me, the organization, we have the plan. We know how to solve problems of economic growth, and that's by getting government's paws out of it, having a low rate, broad-based flat tax, sound money. The gold standard worked for 2.5 centuries with no inflation, aggregate inflation. So you can see what happened since Smithsonian, and I was right.
Oh my God, is Laffer like a return to the gold standard type? That's insane. But also, like, the reason China is faltering right now, right? If you guys need this explained, just in a nutshell right now, the reason the Chinese economy is faltering right now is because they basically made themselves the world hub for manufacturing, like cheap manufacturing. Like, you wanted that, you went to China, right? It's the only place cheaper than Mexico that had like the infrastructure. But the issue was that worked really, really well for about 25, 30 years, right? The issue being that in turn, like, did bring some degree of prosperity, but it also led to better wages for workers over that 30-year period. And part of the problem with that is, where are the wages coming from? It turns out there are other countries now that can, leverage their labor at cheaper prices than China can, and that is causing a colossal problem for their economy. Like, the wages are stagnating because the jobs are going to, like, Africa. They're going to, like, other Southeast Asian countries. And, like, what ends up happening is that they are now made themselves too expensive to deal with, and they're looking for something to kind of unify them. This is why there's a lot of saber rattling at Taiwan right now, essentially. Kind of a, oh, the reason we're doing so poorly is because of Taiwan type situation. It's not cheap anymore. It's still cheap. It's just not as cheap, you know? With the companies doing the amount of volume of production that you look at when you look at China, for them, if they can save like 2 cents per worker, it's more worth it to them to go to a different country and do that, you know? Were they on the low end or the high end of production? Who's they? What are you talking about? Like, if you're producing small quantities, you can produce locally, right? Because it does take money to ship things overseas. But the issue is China would produce in bulk. China? Well, again, it depends on what you're asking, right? If you're asking, like, was a certain industry on, like, the high end of production, like, that I could help you with, but, like, for example, in China, like, textile production is incredibly big, and they produce huge volumes of textiles. But if that work could be done for like 10 cents per worker cheaper, it might go to like a Sri Lankan factory instead, you know? Might go to a African factory. Part of the issue and part of the reason other countries couldn't necessarily compete was because they didn't have the infrastructure built to, like, have a factory that could compete with a Chinese factory. But that problem is resolving itself. Like, people are investing in these areas of cheaper labor in order to take advantage of that. And when those factories get finished, then they spin up and the jobs move from China to whatever country, insert country, you know? I heard they are dependent on US and Taiwan for advanced chip manufacturing. That's not necessarily true. They're dependent in the sense that, like, wide scale production is still not easy for them to do domestically, but not in the sense of, like, cutting edge technology. Like, China's supercomputers are extraordinarily good. They're on par, maybe a little bit behind, like, US computer research, but, like, they're catching up. Yeah, Sheen would be an example, exactly.
Right there with Smithsonian, when they unhinged the dollar, you can see the inflation that occurred. Government spending, as I told you, went from 3% in 1912, 1910 of total GDP. It's now, 30%, something like that, more than that. If you look at regulations are hugely burdensome, way beyond the specific purpose at hand. They've destroyed the ability of private sector to do a good job, and free trade. We've got all these people around, and this is what Smoot-Hawley did, was all of these people around trying to sanction foreigners, trying to intercede in foreign affairs. Trade is not a political tool. We make some things better than foreigners, and foreigners make some things better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products they make better than we make better than they do, in exchange for those products they make better than we do. It's a win-win-win-win. That's where free trade comes in. And to me, the problems today of underperformance are exclusively because of government growing way beyond its should growth. And I think that's the prime issue, not some second order issue. I think that's the prime issue. And all the problems with capitalism that do exist, and that the Professor Wolf correctly enunciates, are secondary issues. The real thing is, how do you in aggregate solve a problem? There are going to be lots and lots of minor issues in there, but capitalism is the solution, not the problem.
Professor Wolf, would you like to respond to that? I mean, you've been certainly asked this before, in the sense that many countries in the past that have adopted pure socialist systems have failed in some sort of sense. Can you address the failures of socialism and whether or not countries that have failed did indeed fail because of socialism or because of other factors?
Yeah, I find it bizarre, this endless repetition of the notion that socialism has failed. I have no idea what you're talking about. If by socialism you mean, for example, government intervention on a fairly massive level, then there are many countries, including the United States, who had the government intervene. For example, follow Dr. Laffer. After the 1930s, the government was a bigger player than it was before. But the period after World War II is a period of remarkable growth. You had very high tax rates and you had remarkable economic growth. Now, the way you can handle that is suggest that the growth had another cause, and the government intervention was not only not the cause of it, but the limit. But that's a bizarre argument. There are many factors that cause everything, and you're simply noticing an association, and the association of socialism as massive government intervention is not an association with low economic growth. It's often an association with rapid economic growth. The Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party have been very powerful institutions for the entire history.
Are the working class better off in China or the U.S.? Generally speaking, I'd say they're better off in the U.S.
Since the revolution in 1949, they call what they do socialism. They don't shy away from that. They extol it. I find it then bizarre when the West, here the United States, confronts the spectacular growth performance of China and then makes the convenient logical leap, well, that must be because of its capitalism. Wait a minute, that's called tautology. If you infer capitalism from economic growth, then you can nicely tell the story, having inferred A from B, that B is the cause of A. But you can't do that. You learn in philosophy course, you can't kind of do that. The Chinese give the government massive control. I don't find that all that exciting, because for me, I'm struck by the fact that whether you're in the United States and you have extraordinary inequality of wealth and income, and you go to China and you find they're the number 2 country producing billionaires these days, after the United States, and rapidly catching up, you've got inequalities that I find morally and well as economically indefensible. The critique of capitalism has always been on one foundation above all others. It produces a spectacular inequality of wealth and income. And I see that linked to the government being the tool of those with the wealth and being the problem for those without it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I do like that he pointed out that there was a tautology going on there. Like, you could, like, the idea that if you see economic growth, it must be capitalism is silly, because you can just even think back to like older periods of human history when there wasn't capitalism. When capitalism didn't exist, economies still rose and fell. Like, economic growth or even economic downturn are not indicators in of themselves of capitalism.
If you
Can I
don't
respond to a
want
little?
to, let me just
Let me, if I
finish.
can I respond as you go? I'm getting a lot of issues. I think where we should interact here, Professor, is that what I tried to say, and maybe I didn't make it clear, is that my view of what caused the Great Depression, we were hugely profitable, that the initiation.
In China, the corporation is the government? No. Oh, honey, no. No, they have multi-billion-dollar companies over there. They have. I can assure you, China has corporations.
The initial action that caused the system was the Smoot-Hawley tariff, xenophobia, if you will, in the U.S., and that was it. It's not just an association. You have association, then you have insertion, and once you have to have association for causation.
Smuggy face.
Then you have to have isolation, which I think my book goes through very carefully, and taxes have consequences. And then you
aren't they all owned by the government? No. They're all permitted by the government. But they all operate independently. They all manage their own affairs. The only issue is, like, their government is an authoritarian hellscape, so, like, if they make too much money, or they're too successful, or they're getting too much support from the masses, then, you know, like, one of their CEOs might get brought in for questioning and not be seen again for, like, the next 2 years. You know? So, yeah.
have to have insertion, which is the
they have socialist regions of the country, and then they have economic enterprise zones, which are like where companies can be privately owned and operated, but also you're still in China under the watchful eye of their government, and if you get too out of line, they'll come have a talk with you for a very long time in an undisclosed location.
Which is the tariff of 1929.
Does China do capitalism better than the United States? That's real hard to say. I would say that I guess my my response to that would be that China does capitalism. Both countries do it, and in both countries it's bad. But the way in which it's bad is shaped by, like, the culture and, like, governmental structure of each country. So, like, they're both different. Don't they have living spaces that are, like, 2 by 6 feet wide? Yeah, but, like, so does Japan. And Japan is firmly a capitalist country. Have you, like, just Google the term capsule hotel.
That really brought the beginning of the collapse of a very prosperous. In China, I tried to go through again. It was a state-run enterprise, no question. It's communist government. Politically, it was there. But what they did on the springtime in China was they really cut taxes dramatically. They put in a sound money policy.
Does China manage capitalism better? My default answer, my instinctual knee-jerk reaction to that is no. Like, if China managed their capitalism better, they wouldn't need to install suicide nets on their factories, you know? Like, if they managed it better, like, you wouldn't have, like, a massive working class that is extremely dissatisfied. Yeah, quasi-spec, I agree. Because I think China's goal with allowing capitalism and managing capitalism is different from whatever a United States goal would be. Right now, the government of China views kind of this capitalistic endeavor that they're doing as a way to kind of build themselves up as a global hegemon, and then be able to kind of, the idea being that at some point they'll turn and, like, transition their working economy into a true socialist one. But I don't think that there's really any indication that the authoritarian governance of China would actually wind up doing that. that's not really real estate. A lot of their economy is oriented towards like public works projects, with the idea being that China's population would boom to such a degree that they would have need of cities, hence the ghost cities you might have heard about from China. The issue being that the one-child policy really fucked their population growth and has rendered a lot of those cities completely pointless. Does China believe in xenophobia? Yes.
Free trade policy. And that's where you got that enormous growth. It wasn't because they had a communist government. They've had a communist government throughout the whole period.
Right. It has nothing to do with the government. What it has to do with is the organizing of the workplace.
But their performance was very different during when they didn't have the free markets and when they did. And now you see it being withdrawn, and you see the communist economy of China collapsing before our very eyes. That's what I'm trying to say, is it's cause and effect. China had huge tax cuts. It had sound.
Is the ideal economic system to have both some capitalism and some socialism? I mean, I think the ideal system is to have worker-owned workplaces such a better and more attractive option as to render privately owned business like a quaint thing of the archaic past. You know, like, if you could collectively own your workplace, why would you ever want to work for a private workplace where a boss takes more money, is unaccountable to you in any way, and like just profits off of your labor as much as they would like? Like that, as opposed to like working at a relatively equivalent firm for more money with more agency. Like the idea here being that once democratic ownership became more normalized, no one would actually really want to privately own a business. How do you determine wages according to you? Does the government decide, or like what do you mean? Do you mean in like a democratic co-op? How does like a democratic worker co-op decide wages? Is that what you mean? In your ideal system, oh, well, the workers would set their own wages. Like, the workers would like probably like if you were at a like kind of a larger company, you would have like quarterly meetings where the other workers at the company sit down. You get a presentation from like the accounting department. They tell you you got X amount coming in, you've got X amount going out as expenditures, here's what you have left over, and then you guys can vote on what to do with the remainder. And you know, like they can decide that collectively. If it's a small enough firm, maybe you can just like have like a chit chat with like your 4 other coworkers to establish wages. But if it's like a large hierarchical company, then workers would figure out some kind of agreement to go forward with. Why can't you do that now, or are they doing it and I don't know? So right now, if you are trying to say, how do I put this? Typically, if you were to try to do this at an American company, they would try and fire you. And if they couldn't do that, they would foil any of your attempts to try and communicate with your coworkers. And you don't actually have bargaining power as a single worker in a private company, right? If you formed a union, that would be a lot closer. But if you notice, there's like a lot of fights between unions and private ownership, right? So the idea of a democratic worker co-op is that effectively the union becomes the company. So there's no longer time spent fighting between the two or having to go on strike. It's just the same entity. It's the entity that you construct to organize the workplace, you know? Did you just say the H word, hierarchy? Yes. Instead of one person at the top emphasizing their own profits, or like private shareholders who emphasize profit at all cost, even if it comes at cost to the workers. Workers can instead choose to use the profits to like better their working conditions, or pay themselves more, or have like more time off, you know? What country fits your description the most? Well, the issue is we have democratic co-ops right now in the United States. And we know, we have data on how well they work. Like, workers are happier, they're better paid, etc. We have these right now. The proposal I'm making is just having more of them until, like, they become the norm. You know? The co-op you're describing sounds a lot like Germany, where the unions have a say in how the company is run and workers do what is best for the company because it keeps their job secure. Yes, except that the company and the union become the same organization, right? That what I'm describing is removing the tension between union and company and just having the union. We have examples of this in America. King Arthur Baking being a big one. Oldest flour milling company in the United States. It's a democratic worker co-op, baby. But isn't that sort of gay, though? Sure. And being gay is awesome. I started a union at my last job for exactly what Jack is talking about, the Young Turks. Wait, you started a union at the Young Turks? Certainly seems to be going that way, as long as you have democracy, not dictatorship. Just needs time. Well, yeah. The issue is, I reject all dictatorship, all authoritarianism. Right? That is not what I'm about. But the issue is, capitalists don't want you to make democratic worker co-ops. Like, in a capitalist system, if this did become more commonplace, it would threaten the profits of private businesses. So there's hostility towards that baked into the system itself, right? Which is why I think we need to organize in order to adopt more reforms that allow us to normalize these despite that hostility, right? I think we should have like specialized loan programs designed to foster democratic worker co-ops. I think we can make really, really good arguments for those. For example, a democratic worker co-op run by workers is not going to vote to move their company to a different country. You know? There's a lot of economic incentive for these things to be created in like state and local areas. You know? Not me alone. I was part of the group that did, yes, in 2019 and 2020. They answered it with aggressive union busting. Crazy stuff. Huh. Their usual argument is like everything becomes expensive. Private businesses might argue that, but that's hard to argue when like private businesses price gouge their customers at every available opportunity. So like usually the argument against it is like, you know, you need strong leadership and this will be too loosey-goosey, won't be able to respond to the needs of the time, etc., etc., etc. You need private businesses. That's the American way, you know. Usually it's stuff along those lines, because again, they don't care if things are getting more expensive. That's literally how they make money. Yeah, I thought I followed a bit of the TYT union stuff. I thought it all ended amicably, and I thought the union got approved, but I guess not. Was that the breaking of the gas leak over at TYT? All right. Let's continue with this.
Money, and it had free trade, which created that 66-fold increase in real GDP per adult. And then once they've withdrawn that, you can see right now the collapse before you. Same thing with Chile. Now, I was down there in Chile in 1973, 74 with the Chicago boys. What we did and the changes in 1977, 78 with the economy. You got the most prosperous economy in South America, phenomenal performance relative to all the other economies there because of the policies put in, not because.
Oh yeah, no, Brianna Huffman, like if we're talking about like medieval economics, it wasn't all proto-capitalist. Like it went from like feudalism, a very, very, very long period of feudalism, into kind of this mercantile, like guild-based system that kind of fostered this beginning of like a middle class type of economic position. And then that went into kind of the mercantilist system of like accumulating wealth, which then went into kind of the proto-capitalism.
Because of association of A with B or B with A, but because of the policies.
Holy fuck, he's admitting to the coup in Chile? Wait, I missed that.
In real GDP per adult. And then once they've withdrawn that, you can see right now the collapse before you. Same thing with Chile. Now, I was down there in Chile in 1973, 74 with the Chicago boys. What we did and the changes in 1977, 78 with the economy. You got the most prosperous economy in South America, phenomenal performance.
Dude, are you bragging about the fascist takeover of Chile? Are you seriously right now bragging about Pinochet? About how you're bragging about Pinochet being great? Are you kidding me? I am baffled. This guy is legitimately evil.
Relative to all the other economies there because of the policies put in, not because of association of A with B or B with A, but because of the policies. And now you find it reversing itself once they've gone back to a socialist system there of government trying to control all the economy. And you can see the collapse of Chile before our very eyes. So I see it very much as a cause and effect.
Jesus Christ, dude. Orville Redenbacher was Augusto Pinochet's right-hand man. I guess so. What do you do about increasing the interest rate? Wait, what do I think about increasing the interest rate so people lose jobs? Yeah, that's pretty demonic, yeah. But also keep in mind, a lot of the inflation, it's a result of private companies skimming and price gouging, using the pandemic as an excuse. True stuff.
Not as just an association. It's really not. I really do believe it. In the book, after World War II, we had massive tax cuts and a huge reduction in government spending as a share of GDP. Government spending as a share of GDP during World War II was almost 50% of GDP. And it was all blown up in Europe and Asia. I mean, exploded. Once you got that stopped, all of a sudden you got the income effects of a very prosperous, exploding economic growth because of the withdrawal of government spending, not in spite of it. And there were major tax cuts, overridden Truman's vetoes of them, major tax cuts that also came at that time. And then you got the Four Stooges, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, the largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance probably ever put on planet Earth. And you saw what happened to the U.S. economy. You know, you saw what happened when Reagan came in. You know, from January 1st, 1983 to June 30th, 1984, that's an 18-month period. Real GDP grew by 12% in real terms during that period. That's at an 8% per annum compound rate. That is the old-timey Chinese growth rate. So I think if you look at the...
Yeah, because they privatized industry. And while they were busy privatizing, like, it turns out in the long run, that fucked us all over.
Correlations and the causations, I think we could have a very interesting discussion, but I tried to go through all of this in my book, Taxes Have Consequences, chapter by chapter, looking at these things. I'm wrong a lot, Professor, so please forgive me. I
We're aware.
make errors all the damn time. You can ask my ex-wife about some of the personal ones as well, but
That checks out.
that's what I'd love to discuss. I think that's where
Professor
prosperity
Wolf, I
will
think,
be
has
restored.
had a final point. Yeah, had another point.
Let me answer just
Please,
two
go,
or three
go, go.
little, just as precisely as I can. Looking at the world today, since you refer repeatedly to the so-called collapse of China, I'm now going to use the projections of the International Monetary Fund. Clearly not a Chinese institution, clearly not friendly to China, etc. They have a prediction that's out right now for what economic growth will be through the rest of 2023 and through 2024. The prediction for the United States is 2%. The prediction for China is 5.5%. That's the same 2 to 3 to 1 ratio we've seen for the last 30 or 40 years. The argument that the Chinese economy is not the leading growth sector of the world today, that just doesn't hold. Even if you read the financial press, the whole financial press is counting on China pulling the world economy out of the recession that is already there in England, that will arrive in the next couple of months in Germany, and that is expected to hit this country at the end of this year or next. Let me just...
I love the...
Let me just finish.
Let Professor Wolf just finish.
Let me just finish the point. I want to give you, let me grant to you, I mean, I wouldn't if we had more time, but I'm going to grant to you Smoot-Hawley tariff before the October crash of the economy in 1929 is an important factor. And anything else that the government does is an important factor. I don't dispute that the government has an impact. I dispute that it makes much of a difference in terms of what we're talking about. If you want to explain the Great Depression based on Smoot-Hawley, then you have to explain why the Smoot-Hawley tariff
I'll cover the Charlie Kirk thing after this.
Comes into being, because it comes out of the prosperous 1920s, largely private capitalist system, which is continually causing problems because, for example, one group of industries needing a tariff persuades or buys the government to do it. That happens all the time. There's nothing in private capitalism that prevents that from happening, just like private capitalism generates monopoly capitalism, which is then undone for some more competition. For me, you haven't answered the question when you say the government made something happen, because I will explain to you how capitalism makes the government do or not do what it does most of the time. Our tax system is a function of rich people getting out of paying the taxes.
This is true. This is like the fundamental problem of capitalism in a liberal society, right? Capitalism concentrates wealth, and then that wealth in turn can be used to loosen any laws or regulations that might be inconvenient to the accumulation of wealth, even if it comes at the cost of workers, right? Like this is one of the fundamental issues that he's describing.
At the end of World War II, the top rank private level of income tax was, as you correctly said, 94%. Today, it's in the high 30s. That's a spectacular tax cut, right? That wasn't done for economic growth. That was done because rich people don't want to pay taxes, and they have the money to make sure that the tax rates are lower.
Yep.
Marx's argument always was that capitalism will undo itself. And the answer is, yeah, it does that. And part of the way it does that is unequal income and wealth. Part of the way is it's unstable every 4-year crash. And part of it is using the power of the private wealth to shape the government in ways that end up not only bailing them out when they fail, but bringing the system down in some of the ways Art Laffer points out. For me, this is a spectator sport as capitalism undoes itself the way the previous systems also did.
I've
I'll
got
let Dr. Laffer respond.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. By the way, the Smoot-Hawley tariff was brought in by the electorate. It was brought in by a bunch of politicians who thought they could protect industries in the United States by putting on tariffs on foreigners. Totally, totally correct. And then their response to the collapse was to insert more government, et cetera. But we have learned lessons on that. And if you look at the period here and what the professor is also saying, which is, again, completely correct, when you have high tax rates, the rich are different from the rest of the people in the world. They're rich. And they can afford lawyers, accountants, deferred income specialists, favor grabbers, lobbyists. When you see a group of people hanging with Obama-Wama, it's not a group of street people trying to explain to him what it's like being poor. It's a group of people from Goldman Sachs trying to sell their new tax shelter, et cetera. That is all true. But when you look at socialist systems, the failures of capitalism are very clear. They're very apparent. And Professor Wolff is right that they're right there in front of. But they're also equally well there with the socialist system. In fact, they're more so. When you look at systems under socialism, they don't have any type of self-correcting mechanism to bring them back off the disastrous death spiral that we do. We were able to get through the Great Depression because we were able to shift back into a capitalist system after World War II. The socialist governments don't do that. They don't have a method back. There's no way that the power of Chairman Xi can be undone and those controls ever reversed in the Chinese prospect or in Russia or in Chile or these other countries, you know. So I would argue that the production thing in a communist system is just not there. I'd love to have the professor explain what he believes the policy should be of a socialist government that does have total control and what they.
Yeah, so part of what Laffer is doing right now, I think, is falling for kind of a classic capitalist stumbling block, which is the conflation of authoritarianism and socialism. When most socialists here in the West talk about socialism, they're not talking about authoritarian dictatorial control over the economy. What they're talking about is workers controlling their workplaces, having democratic say in how their labor is used.
They would do to create the process. What is their version of the quid pro quo to create the vent for surplus, which was the starting question?
Professor Wolff, I'll let you respond to that and also comment on the inequality that you've brought up several times up until now. The problem of inequality, I'll just read you a few statistics. So from the Federal Reserve data, currently the bottom 50% of the United States, they hold roughly $3.4 trillion of household wealth. Now, the top 50% holds the remaining $140 trillion. So the top 10% holds $53 trillion, while the top 1% alone holds 8 times the entire bottom 50%. According to...
I'm not going to lie, this infuriates me. Like, holy shit. Yeah, exactly, Astromegex. And I think, or Mage. I think I'll just Astromage. Yeah, a lot of people think that, and that's not really what it is.
Statistics released in 2022, nearly 56% of Americans don't have $1,000 in their savings account to cover emergency expenses. Is this going to lead to social unrest is my first question. And second, what can we do to address maybe this income inequality problem that a lot of people think is a problem?
Okay, let me try quickly to answer. On the question, will it cause social unrest? I think we already see it's not will it already is. Look at our political system. Look at the phenomena of Trump or any of the other signs of it, whether it's, you know, the impending collapse in the next few days of the subsidy for childcare, which is going to take, you know.
Yeah, like without your help, like that that my car repair expenses would have like wiped me out last month. So like I feel this in my bones.
3 or 4 million women out of the labor force, if not more, suddenly, because they're not going to have childcare, which they need in order to work. I mean, we are seeing social unrest in our cities, in our society, 12 different ways. You'd have to be blind. We lose 100,000 people to opioid overdoses every year. These are staggering signs. Only people with a need not to see what's going on would miss the fact that we are in deep trouble, and that
Hey,
at least
Abyssalists.
part of the story has to do with the extraordinary inequality that exists in our society in terms of what people can access in the way of emotional support, physical support, food, clothing, shelter, education, and all the rest. So we're already there. Capitalism is in deep trouble.
But what's your answer? What would you do?
Good. That's the second part.
I would recommend, by the way, like his Socialism for Dummies lecture is incredibly good. I'd very much recommend it.
My answer is where I think socialism is going. My answer is the problem starts, a crucial part of it, which we have not addressed, in the organization, as I said, of the enterprise. Let me simply sketch for you. Just do an imaginary effort with me, because the socialism I'm talking about doesn't exist. Not in Scandinavia, not in the Soviet Union, and not in the People's Republic. It's a new way of thinking about socialism. It's not against the government versus private. It's a new direction. Here it is. You organize the workplace the way you organize the community, democratically. What do I mean? It's one person, one vote. We get together in the enterprise, the factory, the office, the store, and we decide collectively what we're going to.
As a jumping off point for ignoramuses like me, I mean, I wouldn't describe you as an ignoramus, but let me just pull it up here. Maybe it wasn't called Socialism for Dummies. Wait, let me pull this up. Oh, Jesus. I'll find it later. I'm sorry.
Do what we're going to produce, what technology we're going to use, where we're going to carry out the production, and what we're going to do with the surplus, or if you like, the profits our enterprise generates. Here's what that will mean. Will we democratically give a few people at the top trillions of dollars while the rest of us don't have $1,000 to take care of an emergency? Answer, we're not going to do that. Are we going to do something that is profitable but destroys the environment, destroys the climate of the planet we depend on? No, because yeah, we are interested in profit, but we're also interested in all the things not measured by, not symbolized by profit. We're going to have a range of objectives. Profit is one, but only one. We're going to take care of the environment because we depend on it. And we're going to distribute wealth much more equally because that's what we want as a society, and that's what we democratically produce. We're not going to have, and here's my concluding point, we're not going to have inside the workplace the very kings and queens we no longer permit in the political space.
True. You would never, ever, ever put up with, like, some snooty nobleman telling you what to do. Why do you put up with it from, like, Chad, your manager at Best Buy?
The monarchs we got rid of 4 centuries ago have cleverly come back. They're inside
The we being the working class.
enterprise where they're called the CEO, the CIO, the CFO. They're the people who aggregate to themselves the enormous bulk of the surplus we all help to produce. And if we democratically change that, if we make the worker co-op the basis of our enterprise system rather than the top-down hierarchical capitalist enterprise, I think we have a chance to deal with the kinds of social crises and inequalities we've been talking about.
Dr. Laffer, what's
Very
your
interesting, by the way.
proposition?
That was
I'll
very
let you respond. Yeah.
Yeah, just I don't think that will happen when you have the local democracies. They will immediately turn into leadership, different groups like unions are. Union leadership is just as monopolistic, capitalistic as any business is today. And democracy at the local level will not be able to solve this sort of general climate, all that other stuff. It's just not going to happen. It will devolve immediately into a different type of hierarchical system that will lead to even worse results.
Yeah, see, this is what they typically respond with, except here's the thing. You can have hierarchical democratic worker co-ops. So, like, when he talks, oh, it's going to inevitably devolve into hierarchy. Yeah, but you can have a democratic hierarchy. We have one in America right now in our government. We can certainly have one in our workplace.
Than having a marketplace determine it. That's my view of the world, and I think that a lot of what
No problem, Miggs.
Professor Wolf is talking about is intrinsic in the human condition. Is that countries almost always have leaders, have almost.
Oh yeah, like Sophie, he's definitely from the school of like greed is good, and like humans are inherently greedy and self-preserving, and therefore would never engage in like helpful group behavior. You know, he's one of those types.
Almost always have a hierarchical top-down system.
Hey,
and
Doctor.
Basically,
I almost called you Dr. Schmouderman, which sounds too formal. I'm sorry. I meant Mr. Schnauderman.
Democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. And I think that happens at the local level, at the top level. I don't see much different here in the city of Nashville and the governance of Nashville itself versus the governance of the U.S. All of those democratic systems collapse the lower and lower they get, and it becomes exploitation. I think the only hope we can have is to have a.
I was reading Schmouderman's comment that started with Dr. Copium, and I almost said out loud, Dr. Schmouderman. Okay, anyway.
And a government that tries to level the playing field, that tries to have laws, antitrust laws, tries to have monetary policy, trade policy, incomes policies, and also tax policies and spending policies that level the field, that allow individual incentives to really produce the amount of surplus that we.
The issue here, though, is that these incentives might be good in and of themselves, but this doesn't take into account the fact that in a capitalist society, those rich assholes can then come and like wait elections with funding different campaigns or withholding funding from other campaigns. And by waiting the outcome of these elections, get more beneficial policies for their own profiteering and thereby undo the regulations and incentives that he is talking about.
We really need in this country to provide for prosperity for a lot of people. But income inequality is a state of nature that I don't think we can eliminate by trying to redistribute and cause everyone to lose.
Dr.
Yes. You know you're on good intellectual footing when your argument is just, well, income is unequal in nature, so ergo we can't construct anything better than that. Problem solved. Dude.
Laffer, is it true though that I'll just follow up and I'll let Dr. Wolf
Sure.
respond. Is it true that a surplus is what we need in our economy? Aren't surpluses mismanaged? Is one argument. Aren't surpluses just hoarded by the wealthy and not distributed properly so that everybody is prosperous?
No, I don't believe that at all. I think Salk, Jonas Salk, the vaccine, it was used by everybody. It solved polio problem. I think Twitter.
What?
Is one argument. Aren't surpluses just hoarded by the wealthy and not distributed properly so that everybody is prosperous?
No, I don't believe that at all. I think Salk, Jonas Salk, the vaccine, it was used by everybody. It solved.
Joan, I need to look this up real quick. But I'm pretty sure Jonas Salk gave up the patent to the polio vaccine and declined to make a profit on it because he believed so strongly in curing polio. Right? Yep. Okay. Yep, that's right. Yep. So he did that, which he was not a wealthy dude. This is not an answer to the question. It has not, that example has nothing to do with money. Except that he refused to profit off of it, which is the opposite of what this guy thinks people would do.
Solve polio problem. I think Twitter is a one by Elon Musk or whoever it was, is used by almost everyone. They all tweet or X to each other. I look at all of these things, that cars now are everywhere. If you look at U.S. cars today, they're much better than they were. I mean, all of these capitalists that develop these industries, the benefits have flown right down. We have refrigerators, we have air conditioning, we have heating.
This doesn't mention anything about the question. The question was about hoarding profits and not distributing the profits. It's quite interesting that he's talking about how good everything is, because it sounds like he's just avoiding the question because he thinks, yeah, it's okay for the rich to hoard their wealth.
We have prosperity on the local level and on the personal level that is unparalleled on Earth.
Did
And
he
I think
say
it is these
polio
special
problem?
people in the
Yeah, he said polio problem because he's that fucking old.
capitalist system that have developed all these wonderful, wonderful things and advances that have come down and ultimately been achieved by the everyday working class person in America. And that, to me, is the miracle. The beauty of capitalism is the benefits do come down to everyone in the system in due course. Not everything happens at first. That's very true. But monopoly is one of the things I think we really have to make sure we don't have. The healthcare system in the U.S. today is monopolistically run. We don't know what the prices are. We don't know what the outcomes are or any of that. And you still have to go to hospitals without any of that knowledge. We need to put transparency in there and bring it back to a capitalist system, not the way it's run right now, which is opaque, no price system. So that's my view. I think these people are
An opaque system can still be capitalist, though. What are you talking about?
the beneficiaries of the world, not the enemies, and that capitalism allows us to have those people that would never have existed without a free enterprise, pro-growth, democratic economic capitalism. My view.
Professor Wolf, what is a Marxist?
God, I'm going to pause right here to say hello. We've been going for about 6 hours now. If you've been enjoying the stream, hit the follow button on Twitch, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, hit the like button on the YouTube stream. We are currently only 9 likes away from hitting 100 likes on the stream. Let's go. I believe in us. And consider dropping some subs or donos, because this show is literally only possible because you guys support me. Without your subs or donos, I would have to go and do other things. But you guys keep me afloat month to month and allow me to keep doing this crazy little professional experiment that I will probably be doing until I'm older than that half-dead corpse on screen. So let's keep doing it together. Let's go. It's possible because you're a great host. Well, thank you, Amish inventor. And like, I just find this fascinating. Again, to me, this is like the title fight. This is like the title fight of economists. It's really satisfying seeing Arthur Laffer get his ass handed to him in a debate like this. Yeah, no, Schmouderman, it's like when I watched a Tim Pool video for the first time and realized that like I could be an online politics commentator, because there's no way I could be more boring than Tim Pool, and he has millions of people who allegedly watch his videos. Anyway, subs, donos, anything you can do to help out, very, very much appreciated. I tried to wink and I blinked both my eyes like a dumbass.
Solution to what is this? What is the approach to dealing with an economic surplus? What do you do with the surplus once it's there?
All right. Well, let me respond. I'll try to get to that question, but let me respond just to Art Laffer's last comments. And no disrespect to him whatsoever. I'm enjoying this conversation. I admire him anyway. When systems are in decline is when you hear most often the lament that goes like this. Yeah, our system is in trouble. Yeah, our system has a lot of warts all over it. But it is in the end human nature.
Yep, appeals to nature.
You can't break out of this. It's given by our physical existence. In the declining days of slavery, it was always heard, look, the human community divides into those who are masters and those who are slaves. If God didn't want you to be a slave, he wouldn't have made you that way.
Yep. Yeah, no, people made arguments like this about slaves. And notice that in a lot of cases, those arguments are still around today, just about different aspects. The argument for slavery lost, but the argument lived on for other aspects of, life that people just disagree with. Like whether it is, like miscegenation or gay rights or trans people, like that argument kept going. If God wanted you to have sex with a man, he would have made you a woman. This argument is still around. My man Spittin' Fire, Richard Wolff, when he's in fine form, okay?
But you're trying to undo slavery.
Hey, Dustin the Damned.
You little puny human being are undoing God's work. It's the desperate effort to hold on to a system versus to ask, and to really ask in an honest way, can't we do better?
Also, like, to bring this to emphasize this in a different way, the divine right of kings could be described as a similar argument. The idea that God made the king for a reason. And if God made the king for a reason, then God made the serf for a reason, right? If he wanted you to have a better station, he would have made you in a better station, And in a lot of ways, like, that's the same argument going on here. Like, you are naturally a serf. You are naturally a king. You are naturally poor.
Isn't it possible to arrange the society to do better than it is now doing? And the end of slavery
True
was a
winners and
clash
losers.
between those who believe.
Yeah, it turns out if we're not all feeling like we're in a utopia, it would seem that that maybe capitalism is not quite right for our natural inclinations.
It was written in the DNA of our species versus those who said we can do better. For a long time, the ones who thought it was in our species prevailed. But as we now know, the enemies of slavery who said you can do better did in the end prevail. We don't have massive slavery anymore. The same thing happened in what used to be called the Ancien Régime, the end of feudalism in Europe. We're just
Hey,
doing the
Cabiel, how you
capitalist
doing?
phase now. We have the people who think it's built in, it's the best we can do.
Greed is the natural form of humanity. You know, they, instead of just couching it in an appeal to the divine, they couch it in an appeal to the natural world. Yeah, exactly. Yes. I love listening to Richard Wolff talk about economics because I feel like I get a better understanding or like more interesting connections to the world or history than I do from other economists.
There can't be better. This is wonderful. Let's celebrate it. Versus those who say, yeah, it has achievements. Slavery did too. And yeah, it has terrible faults. We can do better. Socialists, if they have anything in common with one another, is we can do better. And I believe that if you transform industry from the top-down hierarchy we think is somehow necessary, and by the way, public enterprises and private enterprises have that in common. They use
How do we incentivize? How do we incentivize a business to not be hierarchical? Because Dr. Wolff, you mentioned this several times.
But again, you don't have to incentivize the business to not be hierarchical, because what matters is how that hierarchy is formed and maintained. Like, you don't have to have a perfectly horizontal co-op. Right? Like, a good example of this, if you guys didn't know this, the studio that made the game Dead Cells, the video game studio, is a democratic worker co-op. But it's organized in a flat manner. And the flatness of the co-op essentially means everyone has an equal say in what they do. They're able to talk with each other and come to an agreement in like meetings and whatnot about how to run the company. It's very simple, very fast. The issue is there are like 5 of them at that studio, right? Probably more by now, since I watched their talk on their work structure. But the point being, flat structures work for a small number of people. For a large group of people, hierarchy is basically inevitable. And so the solution here isn't necessarily to get rid of the hierarchy, but instead to adopt a means by which that hierarchy is operated in a democratic manner. Did they all make the game? I think so, yeah.
The answer's simple. The answer's simple. Just ask people. Ask the mass of people in every enterprise, do you want to be told what to do from the minute you enter this enterprise to the minute you exit? Do you want to be told what to do, where to sit, what machine to use, how to function with it? And at the end of the day, having poured your mind and body into producing something, you go home and somebody else decides what's going to be done with the fruits of your labor? Or would you rather have a democratic system where you have some say in all of that? Look, we know where people went 3 centuries ago. Capitalism came in by overthrowing the feudalism before.
Hell yeah, we'll do it again, baby.
Workers are now in the process of figuring out that capitalism has to go. That's why the conversation about socialism is everywhere. I just read that the Hoover Institute in Stanford, where Art Laffer and I did our education years ago, has just released a new program of the whole Hoover Institute on the fact that socialism is once again on the agenda. I'm reminded of Mark Twain's famous argument when he read in the Hartford newspaper an obituary for himself. He wrote the lines, gee, to the editor. He wrote a letter. He said, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. The reports of the death of socialism, desperately wanted by those who fear it, are likewise exaggerated, because I can tell you, as one, I've never felt more support and more interest in what I'm doing than today, and I've had a long life.
See, by the way, this is why when I talk about like socialist reforms, things like Medicare for all, things like normalizing democratic worker co-ops, or bringing back postal banking, or different economic or business-oriented policies the U.S. could adopt. This is why I feel a lot of hope right now for a socialist movement in America, because this support, well, it isn't enough yet, and it feels like it's been so slow to gain traction, is gaining traction in the United States. Workers are waking up to the idea that they deserve rights, that they deserve autonomy and agency in their workplace. And that's really exciting. The main issue is that we need to have patience. Not necessarily because, you shouldn't push for change now. But you need to have patience insofar as, like, if we push and we fail and we don't get Medicare for all in like the next 5 years, that you don't break in despair, right? Richard Wolff has been pushing for socialism his entire goddamn life. And he doesn't have any of it yet. He's been doing it the entire time. For longer than most of us have been alive. And the reality is, we push for a better future because we believe something better is possible. But we might not ever live to see that better future, But we push anyway. And we celebrate the wins where we can find them. Amish Inventor, thank you for gifting a tier 1 sub to Chaotic Kitten. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, currently I'll settle for continuing to fight milquetoast neolibs. I would prefer to fight them than have to like buy a gun for fascism, to fight fascism.
I'll let Dr. Laffer respond, and I do have a follow-up.
Sure. Jim, very quickly, it was capitalism that got rid of slavery in the United States. Slavery has existed forever.
Dude, no. If private companies could enslave you today, they would. What are you talking about? Private companies today use slave labor, both inside and outside the United States. In the United States, we just use prison labor. We use prison labor as our slave labor. Or like a company just has an intermediary who has an intermediary who has an intermediary, and they own a private slave plantation somewhere in Malaysia. Like, capitalism didn't get rid of slavery. Capitalism exported slavery across the planet. God, dude. Yeah, why on earth would a capitalist who seeks to maximize profits and minimize losses turn down free labor? God, dude.
It was capitalism. It was the use of that. And the productivity of a capitalist system is much better than productivity of a slavery system. I mean, and you see that happening. It was capitalism that destroyed the
Wait,
Third
just to
Reich.
clarify, you mean it was more of an economic issue than a social issue to end slavery?
I feel like the moderator just turned on Laffer a little bit.
Economic and social. It was both. It was both together, but they clearly, the economic issue was very strong as well. Capitalism did not do well under slavery. It did much better under free. When you look at companies today, those employees that don't like being told what to do. I totally agree with Richard on that. I mean, I just totally agree with him. But then again, those companies don't sell well in the stock market. They're not invested in, and participation by employees and creativity by
I feel like Richard Wolff is just sitting in stunned silence.
Employees and making the companies better are much more successful than those companies that aren't. And a market system allows us to select those more.
But socialism has markets too, ding dong.
Successful companies and have them predominate. And that's exactly what's happening. You're looking at auto companies, you're looking at all of these companies where markets, free markets, democratic economic capitalism is selecting those where the employees are better treated than they are where they are worsely treated. And, to say that the capitalist system doesn't have, socialism does not have any way, David. That doesn't have any way of discriminating between successful companies and unsuccessful companies.
Sure it does. Unsuccessful companies will fail. What? The same thing that happens under capitalism will happen to them. They fail. They go under. They go bankrupt. They close up shop.
And therefore, unsuccessful companies like the post office and like
the post office isn't a company, ding dong. The post office is a public service. It doesn't need to be run at a profit, except that Republicans, probably under your advice, have been trying to kill it for like the last 50 years.
Like the military in the U.S., there are socialist systems. Those systems prevail because there is no market selection for good production there in the free market system. So free markets will select better companies, better things. And my view is that that's the way to go rather than the post office route or the route of the Defense Department, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. I think capitalism is not the Defense Department. It's not the post office. It's really Elon Musk. It's Bill Gates. It's all these other. That's capitalism.
My question for Dr. Wolff is
that if Elon Musk is capitalism, no wonder it's failing. My God.
In a capitalist society, again, how do we create a non-hierarchical a company, given that when you think about who puts up the most risk, it's a founder or a group of founders or a group of key individuals who put up the capital, their own resources to start their company. So somebody who might argue against you might say, well, Dr. Wolff, why can we expect a non-hierarchical system when we've got a few key individuals putting up more risk than everybody else in the organization?
So my response to this would be that we need the government to take on a not insubstantial amount of risk in democratic co-ops, right? There should be attractive loan programs for democratic co-ops because successful investment in them benefits the government in a number of ways, right? Like, workers aren't going to move their factories to another country or even another part of this country, really. Workers aren't going to generally obfuscate their accounting in order to get out of paying taxes, right? These businesses are also better at surviving harsh economic conditions. And on the whole, there's a lot of reasons for the government to take on some of this risk in order to facilitate these structures, these economic engines to be built, you know? When we're looking at private businesses are way more likely to fail. They're way more likely to get embroiled in like tax fraud. They're way more likely to treat their employees like shit. So why not just invest in something that is a better investment? the main issue for democratic co-ops right now is because of how they're structured, they don't offer the returns to investors who are looking to make and maximize their profits. But the government has a different set of priorities than private investors, which means I think that the government should invest in democratic co-ops over private businesses. But that is a rant for another day, maybe.
The answer to that is very, very simple on two levels. Number one, systems don't disappear because you suddenly have people realizing that there is a better one. Systems disappear when the people living in them can't tolerate and will not tolerate continuing in the condition that they find themselves. The slaves ended up saying, it's intolerable. The serfs said, it's intolerable. Were they sure where the next system would take them? Of course not. Nobody can predict the future. You have a few general ideas, you go in that direction, and then you muddle your way through. We are discovering now around the world, including in the United States, that capitalism is becoming less and less acceptable and tolerable. Look at a dozen different polls. The younger the person in the United States, the more criticism of capitalism and the more the interest in socialism.
True.
Okay, number one. Number two, risk-taking. I've always loved this argument. Capitalists are usually rich people who risk a portion of their wealth. Having a good bit of wealth, they're usually smart enough not to risk all of it. By comparison, what have we got with the worker? The worker is going and taking a job at the Jones Company. You know what that means? He's taking a risk. He doesn't know what the Jones Company's leaders are going to do. He has no knowledge. He has no control. He hopes that when he arrives at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, there's a job for him to do. If they make bad investments, if they make bad decisions, his job is lost. His wife, his children, or her husband, her children, are then victimized by decisions they were excluded from. That's a fantastic risk. What are you talking? This notion that the risk is only by the investor. The joke is they take less of a life-changing risk than the workers do. And if you want really to run this argument, if you want to justify the enormous wealth of those who risk their capital, then let there be a payment for the risk taken by the workers. Supplement their wages, because that's a payment for labor, with another payment for the risk they and their dependents are taking.
Yeah, a really good example of this is in the video game industry, right? So I was a video game journalist for about a decade. And in the game industry, basically there were kind of this cycle, right? Where generally speaking, what will happen is a studio will hire up a bunch of talented individuals, and then they'll be part of a development team for, 2 to 4 years. At the end of that development cycle, the game gets released, and then, bam, a bunch of those talented people get fired. And this cycle just keeps happening over and over again. So I have numerous, tales from people I know who have uprooted their entire family, moved everyone across the country to go to a new game studio, only to get there and a couple months later, the studio's sorry, we hired you and another candidate, so we're actually gonna have to let you go. And they look into this story and it turns out, oh well, that this happened because this other candidate that they hired doesn't have a family, is easier to move around within the organization or move between the different development studios in different countries, right? So there are, I can't count the number of people I know in the industry who have just wound up jobless with a huge mortgage in an unfamiliar area, like trying to figure out what to do. This is the risk that workers take on when they go and work for a job at a startup, you know? Or really any company. It doesn't have to be a startup. Labor also takes a risk. And I just need to emphasize that this happens in very concrete terms, not just for like local workers working like minimum wage where you're a cog that is easily replaced and so disposed of with about as much care. But it also happens for jobs where they're paying you like, very good money to do very technical work. It happens across our system because that's what capitalism does. That's how it functions, right? So I love when Richard Wolff pulls out this argument.
This argument was make-believe. It was invented by people who knew they had a problem.
Winners and losers, exactly. Or risking your body. Like how many workers go out and like break their backs every day doing construction work, or it's countless. Or people working in the mines getting black lung. My wrists are ruined from a woodworking job that paid crap with no benefits. Now I in braces and live with pain and limited use of my hands. But bosses take the risks, right? Exactly.
Everybody helps produce profit, but only a tiny minority in every company get it. That's a problem.
If you are working together, you should all share together in the profit of the company.
Unfair, that's unjust, that's unequal. You got to come up with some BS to justify it. Risk was one of those BSs.
Yeah, two things. Workers have a lot of choice in the matter, especially in modern day society, whether to get educated, whether to become skilled in industrial tech, and what jobs they take, what professions they go into. Workers are not without choice today. Far from it. They have a lot of choice today. Capitalists.
No, they don't. Like, again, this comes from a very privileged position. Like the idea that, workers have choice because, in this town, there's a McDonald's, in that town, there's a McDonald's. And the idea being, like, if you're treated poorly at the one McDonald's, you can just go to the other McDonald's in the other town. But it turns out that the other McDonald's in the other town is 15 more miles away. And it turns out that the gas money it will take to get you there and back every day actually negates all of the benefit of working there. So like you wind up just having this network, this web of shit that traps you in this job that you hate. And that happens to countless Americans every day. But he's just like, well, just find a better job. Just find a better job. Yeah, just have you ever thought about eating cake?
Are also not without choice. And it's not that workers can't make bad decisions. They do. And it does risk their wives and their children and all that stuff, or their husbands and their children, depending on whether it's a female worker or a male worker. That's all true. And the same thing with capitalists. It's this system of profit and loss that has generated the prosperity over time. If we didn't have if the earth were to end 6 months from now or 6 years from now, I think an equal distribution of wealth would make sense. But what we need to do, David, is to make sure that we create a political economy of growth, as my professor Paul Baran used to argue, a political economy of growth which created better living standards, better lives in the future than they were in the past. And it's only through trial and error, risk and return, and it on both the labor portion and also on the capital portion. Richard is completely
laborers don't benefit from the risk.
Correct. It is capitalist risk-taking. They have extra, but workers do too. Workers have a choice and they have a skill set, and it's that dynamic that creates the prosperity that is known as human progress. And that's the thing I love about a capitalist system, is it's not all done by one Chairman Xi sitting there in one thing dictating the whole damn mess and creating a feudal system that never made progress in the world.
Well,
End of discussion.
one final subject I like to cover, and we can spend a few minutes on this, is, again, going back to addressing the income inequality problem. It occurs to me that several politicians, even today, have advocated for taxing the rich and giving it to the poor. It's
Yes.
not a new
Thank you.
policy. It's something that's been established. But let me just read to you Biden's proposal, which he came out with earlier in the year, several months ago. It's not news, but I'll just read it again. Now, he advocated that we have to reward work, not just wealth. He announced. He said that specifically we have to tax the ultra wealthy, a billionaire tax, if you want to call it, people with a net worth of over $100 million, 25%. And that's estimated to just apply to 0.01% of all Americans, he argued. So wouldn't be an impact on everyone, just the 0.01%. My question is first to Dr. Wolf and then to Dr. Laffer. Professor Wolf, do you agree with this policy? And second, what should the government do once they tax the billionaires a 25% tax on their wealth?
Well, here's my take on this issue. As long as you allow enterprises to be owned and operated by a tiny group of people, the major shareholders and the board of directors those shareholders elect, you cannot be surprised or upset that those people give themselves the bulk of the surplus being produced. They give it to themselves as dividends as shareholders, and they give it to themselves as multi-million-dollar pay packages for top executives. They've been doing that more and more across the history of capitalism. In other words, income and wealth inequality is built in to a system that allows a small group of people to dominate each and every enterprise, which is why, as a socialist, I'm in favor of democratizing the enterprise. Therefore, I don't have much faith in President Biden. Whether he gets this tax increase or not isn't going to change the basic system. It's window dressing. It's going to make him maybe look good to people who care about this, and maybe that's a traditional Democratic politician's game. But beyond that, it doesn't address the problem. Even if you did a tax, the corporate leaders of America have long ago learned how to use stock options and stock payments and deferred payment
Yeah, and not to mention, even if you passed a tax, they can just leverage their wealth to buy political favor, and in a couple years, that tax is going to be eased, or even have a loophole added to it. Like, that's the game. That's what's happening here.
As Dr. Laffer said, they have an army of accountants and lawyers. That's their job. First of all, they go as lobbyists to shape the law, and then they work as a private army to get around whatever the law is that they help to shape. This is a game. As Senator Sanders said, it's rigged, and people know that it's rigged. Tweaking it here, tweaking it there, this percent over here, that doesn't change a system that has produced this kind of inequality over and over again. We are in a period of decline. I know that's hard for Americans like me to get their heads around. We are not what we were. We have real competition in the world, the way we haven't in a century. And when systems decline, those at the top, the corporate leaders, the shareholders, they have the means and the position to shift the burden of a social decline onto the middle and the bottom below them. That's what we're watching. That's why your car is smaller, your square foot in your apartment is smaller. That's why you're shifting from hamburger to hamburger helper. It is a shifting as we decline. We saw it in Britain. We're seeing it here now. One thing to observe it, much harder to live it.
Dr. Laffer, what's wrong? I'll let you respond, but just
I need to respond to that if I not to his
okay.
comment.
Go ahead.
I want to respond to your question, not to his comment. I do agree with Richard's comments on most of that. Tax sheltering is a huge deal. The rich are able to get that's all true. But I have just finished the book, Taxes Have Consequences, which is the entire history of the U.S. income tax. We have every single tax return. We know how all the top tax rates, it's all this Piketty, Saez, Sancheva, Zuckman type of stuff there that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden are spouting. Every single time we've raised the highest marginal income tax rate, every single time the economy has underperformed. Every single time we've lowered the highest marginal income tax rate in the top 1%, the economy has outperformed. Clearly empty. That's number one. Number two, every time we've raised the highest tax rate on the highest income earners in the U.S., the poor have suffered the most dramatically. Income inequality would improve, but that's because
this is not true. Like, at this point, he's just lying. I feel like Richard Wolff has, like, cornered him, and now he's lashing out like a child, just lying through his teeth.
The rich incomes, reported incomes, fell much more than the incomes. But let me just tell you, when they raised the highest tax rates in the 1930s, the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised did not do well, even though income inequality reduced dramatically. It's because the rich incomes fell because they sheltered their income. They didn't report it anymore. They did do badly, but the poor got hammered. During World War II, the poor were hammered beyond belief, even though income inequality was much less. Afterwards, when income inequality improved, when you drop the highest tax rates on the rich, poor did much, much better. The minorities, the disenfranchised did much better. Income inequality can occur two ways. One, that the rich get richer faster than the poor get richer, or the rich get poorer faster than the poor get poorer. That both of those lead to more income inequality, more income equality. But what you really have—
How did he say that in the most confusing way possible?
The poor get richer much, much faster, even though income inequality as measured goes down because the rich report their income. And by the way, when you raise taxes on the rich, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners collapse before your very eyes. When you lower tax rates on the rich, as happened throughout the whole income period, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners goes way up. Just look at the facts. This is not, David, I've got to say, this is not a matter of opinion. You're not allowed your opinion here. This is a matter of facts, not how you feel. And
you literally, you are the one lying right now.
when we raise tax rates on the rich, the economy is underperformed. When we lower them, the economy is outperformed. And this is a new phenomenon starting in 1913 that had not existed before. And Joe Biden is a victim of stupid economics.
This is a new phenomenon that started over a century ago. Fuck you, old man.
And stupid policies, as is Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, and all these others. High tax on the rich do not help the economy.
Just one follow-up, and I'll let Dr. Wolff respond. Dr. Laffer, so your research, and notwithstanding your research and the facts and the statistics you brought up, what is the— let's just argue with the principle here. What is wrong, or if there anything is wrong with the principle of taking a relatively small percentage of the ultra-wealthy's wealth and just redistributing that into the bottom 50% with maybe UBI or better Social Security or whatnot?
Nothing's wrong with that idea. Nothing is wrong with that idea if it worked. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. You know, when you take from those who have a little bit more, they produce a little bit less. When you give to the—
That's not— what? Yeah, you see, if you go into a billionaire's house and you take his classical antique medieval armor set, he produces less. What? No, actually.
Those who have a little bit less, you provide them with an alternative source of income, and they too produce a little bit less. You know, this is the transfer theorem. It's math. It's not left-wing, right-wing, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. What happens when you do take from the rich a little bit and you give it to the bottom part? That's a question of empiricism. That's what I tried to do with this damn book is look, we have every single tax return, David. It's not as though you have data. I can easily imagine your results being correct. I can easily imagine, but they aren't. That's not the way the facts go. When you raise taxes on the rich do less well. That's true, but they also shelter the hell out of their income, and the poor get hammered. That's what happened every damn time. Look at the tax rate increase in 1932 when we went from a 24% income tax rate to a 63% on up to a 94%. So the poor, the minority, disenfranchised were killed in the Great Depression. And World War II, it was disastrous for lowest income workers. And then look at what happened under Kennedy when he cut tax rates dramatically on the rich from 91% to 70%. The poor, the minority, disenfranchised improved their lot in life dramatically. Look at what happened under Reagan. All I can tell you is we have facts in front of us. This is not about opinions. It's not about.
Yeah, what happened under Reagan was a direct result of like the privatization of things that had previously been run publicly. And then it went on to like destroy vast swaths of America. Like, unironically, part of Jackson, Mississippi's water problem right now is attributable to the privatization of different elements of our society and siphoning off public funds to go to private entities.
About what could or not could happen. I agree with all of you guys on your hypothetical examples. What are the facts? The facts are really simple. When we raised tax rates to the rich to give to the poor got hammered, and the rich sheltered their income and excluded.
Professor
The rich do that anyway, ding dong.
Wolf, will actually respond to this data.
I mean, it's
I'm happy with what Dr. Laffer said. For me, it demonstrates that if you're in a capitalist system, if you lower the tax rates, rich people will take the steps we know they will take, and you will, in the end, see a capitalist system do what capitalist systems always do. The rich keep being richer and the rest of us don't. And if the poor get a better shake for a while, just wait another few years and all of that will be undone.
But isn't it true, Dr. Wolf, that if the rich get richer, everybody else gets marginally richer as well, even if the wealth gap widens? Is that true based on your observation?
No, that's not true. Let me give you a simple example.
that is true. That's the facts.
No,
Those are the facts.
Here's the facts. From 1970s, middle 1970s to pretty much now, the real wage in the United States has gone nowhere. It's a stagnant line, goes like this. If you average it out, it's between 1/4 and 0.5% per year, which is a statistical nothing. Meanwhile, the productivity,
that's wrong.
The productivity of the worker has gone straight up in a line of 1 to 2% across that time.
That's not true.
But productivity is what the worker gives the employer. Wage is what the
your facts
employer.
are incorrect, Richard. Your facts are incorrect. Please, under Kennedy, where we had the big tax cuts there, median wages went way up for workers during that period. Now, when we had Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, they didn't. You're very right there, but you can't clop all these things together as one thing. The productivity growth under Reagan was much higher than it was under Carter or under Lyndon Johnson or under these others. You've got to look at what actually happened, sir. You can't just collapse them all into big things and say, no way, productivity growth under Kennedy and under Reagan was much, much higher than the other ones. And it was much higher under Donald Trump as well.
Oh my God,
look
dude.
at what happens, not
Of course this guy is on Trump's dick.
what you like to happen and what you
I
can
agree.
talk
I
about. But
agree.
you've got to
But
not blow
I'm
it. You got to go hit me with the numbers. Let's get the yearly data on productivity, and I'll just show you the facts and hope you concede the position that you're wrong.
No,
You're just
I've looked at
No,
the
you haven't looked at them. I've got every single tax return. No one has looked at them. I looked at Saez, Piketty, Sancheva, all of these guys, and they don't look at the data that they only have. What I'm telling you is factual, year in, year out. It happens quickly, and then it goes right back when you get a socialist coming in.
Right.
It's hard to explain to you.
We've had no.
I would love to have you give me a review.
It's hard to explain to you. Doesn't mention any real numbers that he's been demanding from Richard Wolff. Dude got triggered. Give
me a review of my book, and I'll go through it with you.
Okay, we've had no socialists, but in this country since the 1970s.
Joe Biden is much more of a socialist than John.
Man, I wish, dude, I wish. How far gone do you have to be like, yeah, Joe Biden's a socialist? Like, this guy saw, like, a news story of Joe Biden walking to a picket line and was just like, oh my god, socialism has come to America. Completely independently of, like, any policies. God, dude.
Than Trump. And Jimmy and Obama and W were clearly socialists. Clinton was a capitalist, clearly cut tax rates and get economic growth. Reagan was a George W. Herbert Walker Bush was a socialist. I mean, we've had very major revisions in tax rates and policies, and every single time the model I'm describing to you holds true. It's every time, not just you can't.
All right, yeah.
I really like looking at chat and seeing you guys bonding. Also, calibrating your English has been extremely good. Yeah. Not usually a streamer chatter guy. We just got some really nice people who show up to chat. Like, y'all are just real kind to each other, and I appreciate that we're building a kind community with each other.
You have
Model I'm just very major revisions in tax rates and policies, and every single time the model I'm describing to you holds true. It's every time, not just you can't.
all right. You have, but all right. Every single one of the
Good night, winners,
one of the men
losers.
you named, Obama, Clinton, Bush, loved capitalism, said so over and over again. If you want to call them socialist, of course, no one can stop you.
No, they're high taxers.
You
They're high
have a
spenders.
problem.
They're big left-wing
At the very
spenders and
least, at the very least, you have to recognize that yours might be the idiosyncratic definition of socialism, not the people who you call socialists who would insist that you are completely wrong, that they are loving.
No, guys, it's totally socialism. You just don't understand, okay? Like, if you squint enough, everything becomes socialism. That dog, socialist. That fire hydrant, socialist. The piss connecting the two of them, socialist, all right?
Of capitalism. The biggest achievement of Mr. Trump, you must know, was the tax cut of the December.
That was my baby.
Yeah, this is the laugher curve guy. Are you shitting? Wait, sorry. I'm sorry. Wait. He's about to try it. He's about to proudly take credit for the massive tax cut to the wealthy. Fuck this guy.
Trump, you must know, was the tax cut of the December.
That was my baby.
2017. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah, well, I mean,
revenues went up.
Yeah, because you introduced small but slightly feelable tax cuts for the working and middle class. But the issue is, you had those sundown after, like, 4 years. So now no one has those tax cuts anymore, except for the ultra wealthy who were already getting like 90% of the value of the tax cut, you fucker.
And
I know, but the
people, the minority disenfranchised were the lowest ever.
The people
and we had growth that exceeded everything before. I mean, it was amazing how it worked. And it net revenues came in. Oh, well, you know, it's hard to do it when you don't want to do on the facts. Give me your numbers.
I do.
Please,
I'm dealing.
the
The facts are that the productivity of labor went up faster over the last 50 years than did the wages, and that's why we have
but it's not even.
inequality.
But it's not even. You can't take
That's
50 years. That under Trump, productivity of workers went up and median wages went up like never before. $6,000 increase in real wages.
Yeah, but that ignores the last 46 years. Like, even if you grant it, the wages are not keeping pace with production. At all, remotely.
In that period, and you blur that into everyone else. You can't do that. You've got to look at the variations within that series and see that under Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, the bad periods outweighed the good periods, but the good periods were there. We need to emulate the good periods and not the bad ones. And all I'm saying is, I'm not trying to be a socialist in your sense of the word. I am a huge admirer of Paul Brand's, as you and I are. We are both students of his, and we both understand it. But you've got to be a statistician here, Richard. You can't just go waving your arms and talking about seven.
I love how he's like, you can't just be a statistician, but like, you aren't citing any stats. Like, well, come on now, dude. Come on. Richard Wolff is bringing more to this conversation than you are. You're just talking in lies and vague generalities.
70-year trends, you've got to look at what happened inside those. When did the median income go up? Under John F. Kennedy, median wages went way up. Under Ronald Reagan, they went way up. Under Donald Trump, they went way up. They went way down under Biden.
I wonder why he's talking about median wages. I wonder if there's any reason for that.
They went down under Obama, Wama, and W. Those two guys were terrible. And
Right,
they got us to wars and all that.
All right, I don't want to debate with you the statistics, but you
I
know,
do.
well,
That I
you
do
know,
want to.
you know
Numbers.
as well as I do that what happens during the 4 years of a person who's the president was shaped by the things that happened 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 years before.
Baloney, I do not believe that. I don't know that.
Giving the credit to the guy who sits at the top, who's largely a figurehead, is a bizarre way.
I don't think that's true. I worked with them personally, all of these people. I was very involved in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I was the guy who in part designed all of the Reagan income tax rate reductions and that stuff, the free trade.
Yeah, we know. We hate you. We, the working people of America who've lived in the ashes of the destruction you've wrought, hate you.
Model, NAFTA, and all of that. I was the first American to go to China in 1970 when China started freeing its markets. I watched it from the top in and watched what they did, and I watched the results, and I've written about it in detail in data terms, not just waving my arms, but we're talking about facts and only facts. That's what you've got to base your arguments on, not on rhetoric. You've got to be, and you and I do agree that the models that Baran did make all the sense in the world. And I'm not arguing against those models, and I'm not arguing against what you say, but I am arguing against how you describe this sort of blend of from 1970 to the present, the capitalist system is all the same. It's not. And corrections in the capitalist system are much better to achieve prosperity than trying to devise a new worker class upward building thing that I don't think will work.
A new worker class upward building thing. Yeah, it sounds like you really understand the concept there, bud.
I know that.
But I hope it did. If it did, I'd be your biggest advocate ever. Believe me, but it doesn't work. Look at the numbers. You've got to be.
It doesn't work. Look at the numbers. This man has never looked at the numbers of a Democratic worker co-op in his goddamn life.
Be a scientist on this and look at data, and you can't just say opinions.
If we had time, I would show you the research done.
Write a review of my book. Write a review of my book, please, and do it. And if you would, I would love it if you would. And rebut all of my statistical arguments in there. Do that. I'd love to see that. Or my book on states. Why are some states outperforming others? It's because their tax cuts, their pro-growth policies, their right to work positions.
Yeah, definitely not anything to do with like their, differences in natural resources or the labor niches they've worked themselves into. Definitely not because of that. No.
These are things that really do matter. We have better wage growth here in Tennessee than in any other state. We have the biggest reduction in the gap between African American students and other students. We have the biggest growth in education achievement. All of that because we have the lowest taxes. We have right to work. We have, these are data.
We're workers, okay? I'm a worker. Right to work laws fucking blow. Fuck you.
Arguments, my 2014 book, The Wealth of States, The History of the U.S. Income Tax. I would love to have that. And David, would you please monitor when we can talk about facts as well as just opinions and just sort of theorizing?
I'm happy to do a
let me
follow-up.
close.
Yeah.
Let me close it with a simple reference to facts. I'm not a supporter, particularly of the People's Republic of China. I'm critical of many things that go on there, as I am critical of things that go on here in the United States. But let's look at the facts of China. They have an extremely powerful Communist Party sitting at the top and regulating what they do. They have a huge public employment sector of state-owned and operated enterprises, and they really closely regulate many aspects of private capitalism in their society. And they have grown their output.
Because of their tax cuts, not because
Let me-
of the
let me-
government.
let me just-
it's
let me
because of their
just finish.
monetary policy,
They-
because of their trade policies,
They
not
have
because of waving arms.
they have outgrown the United States for a generation by 2 to
50
3
years they have.
times, 2 to 3 times the wealth growth of
66-fold
each
increase
year.
in real
They
output
have
for
used-
adults
They have
versus
used
4%, fourfold.
They have used
Please let him
their
finish.
economic growth, the most spectacular economic growth in the
Imagine.
shortest
Wonderful.
time that we know of in modern history, outdoing even the Soviet Union in the
Yeah, like, and of course this economic growth that Richard Wolff is talking about makes complete and total sense, right? Like, yeah, they have one of the at the time the largest population base on the planet that they could leverage for obnoxiously cheap labor, and then like allowing some of the wealth of their country to flow into these economic free zones or economic opportunity zones, I think they're called. Like, yeah, no wonder their economy just took off like crazy, right? It's only now that it's beginning to slow down and normalize, and frankly, it's been booming for so long that like the people who live there are like looking around dissatisfied with the level of improvement they're seeing. And that's why you're getting a lot of the saber rattling towards Taiwan, you know, on top of their semiconductor industry. Vosh raid incoming. Well, welcome, Voshers. Voosh. Tiger Girl for 420. Thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it.
in the 20th century, and way faster than Western capitalism ever
Totally
did.
true. Totally true.
And so
Because of economics.
what we see is a society with a powerful communist party, with a large and influential government enterprise system doing real well. But that's
Not
got
true.
nothing to do with what we're talking about.
It's what it's what the government did in policies that mattered. When they
No.
cut
Oh,
taxes,
okay,
No,
gotcha.
what they
Hush,
did-
hush.
as I
What
said,
the
No
government
worries.
did.
1970, 93%
All right,
of production went through
let me
state
ju-
run enterprises. Now it's below 10%. That's a tax cut. They
Yes.
pegged the yuan to the US dollar. They increased free trade. That's why they grew, and now they're reversing that. And you watch what happens in China. It's going to be a shit show in China. They're now in a death spiral because now they can't keep their goddamn hands out of the economy again.
Okay,
But they had a
one at a
moment
time.
in
All right. So
Sorry.
Dr. Wolf,
The prediction that the Chinese economy was in a death spiral, that the
Is.
Chinese economy was
Not was,
issuing
is.
statistics
That has been a perpetual prediction over like the last 30 years.
that were false, that the Chinese economy was unbalanced 12 different ways. Those have been aired and re-aired every year for the last 30 years.
Bingo.
Meanwhile, China grew to become the powerhouse
Because of
that it
tax
now
cuts.
is. You can credit what
Yeah, they just kept cutting taxes. Yep. Definitely nothing else. Dude, I can't believe I've never seen Arthur Laffer talk. I can't believe this dipshit is single-handedly responsible for all of the economic woes of the United States for the last like 50 goddamn years. Like, no wonder like Republicans and like neoliberalism is just so brain poisoned when it comes to like economics. Like, this is the rot at the heart of our current economic system. Like, unironically, this guy is responsible for it. Is he exactly like you imagined? I did not have a pre-existing idea of what to expect from this man, but I guess I was expecting him to be at least a little bit smarter. You know, like, there are conservatives who I dislike who are at least, like, you know, smart about it. Like, they at least provide good arguments, even if I hate them, right? But this is like, I'm shocked. I like seeing this. I now understand how this guy drew a picture on a napkin that just like enamored the entire like political establishment of his time. You know, he looks like Jimmy Dore's uncle. Yeah, who's the dude on the right? Yeah, this is Arthur Laffer, the guy who basically invented the idea of trickle down economics. Like, oh, we can't tax the rich too much. It'll impact their productivity. That's why you got to give them tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. The more tax cuts you do, the more productive your economy becomes. That's basically his idea in a nutshell. Yeah, he literally drew it on a napkin, and it dominated Republican policy and Republican economic policy for the next, like, 50 years until today. Basically, he's the one who gave legitimacy to, or the idea of economic legitimacy to rich people wanting tax cuts. Prior to that, you know, politicians had to lie and twist and turn. But then Arthur Laffer came along and basically gave all of the politicians like, oh yeah, no, we're just following the advice of Arthur Laffer over there, esteemed and renowned economist. And that has dominated and ruined all of our lives ever since.
Whatever you want.
I do want that, because that's
my point is they organize their enterprises with employer-employee.
Tell Jack Ma that.
They chose not to depart from
Tell
the
Jack Ma that he is
capitalist
just
system.
a cog in the wheel of socialism.
Capitalism is defined by the employer-employee relationship. Just
In
like
China, too.
feudalism.
Let Professor Wolf finish, and we'll get to Dr. Laffer, please.
No.
Feudalism is defined by lord and serf, slavery by master and slave. The slaves thought they could do better, and we got rid of slavery. The serfs thought they could do better, we got rid of feudalism. The employees are in the process of figuring out we can do better than capitalism, and that's the way forward. And the reason that will be important is not because the image is so entrancing, although I find it to be. It will be because the capitalism art is trying to hold on to has long ago disappeared in favor of a government plus big business hold on the economy that produces all of the things Art and I agree are disasters for modern capitalism. We differ. He imagines that the government can be pushed back out, and I don't think big business has any dream of doing it. And I argue that the masses at the bottom who suffer, they'll be the ones, as always, to make the change, because this is a system that is no longer tolerable.
David,
okay,
he's right.
Dr. Laffer, yes.
He's just right. I do believe that the capitalist system can be resurrected.
Griffiths,
we can
exactly.
have a low-rate, broad-based, flat tax.
You got it.
We can have spending restraint. We can't have sound money. We can't have free trade. We can't have minimal regulations. And I do believe the capitalist system can be corrected and made much better. And we both see the world in the same.
Again, any correction to the capitalist system is going to be resisted and ultimately overturned by capitalism. You know, if you believe that like capitalism can be improved via democratic reforms, well, those democratic reforms are going to be bought and paid for and changed by the capitalists, so they don't accomplish their reforming aim. Because capitalists want one thing: to maximize their profits. Even if it comes at the expense of democracy, and even if it means doing illegal activities in order to keep those tax reforms from happening, or economic reforms from happening.
Like, by the way, I really do, with Richard, and I appreciate, but I really do want you to look at the details, because a lot of, as a guy friend of ours once said, Einstein said, The system lurks in the Feinheiten, in the details. Everything is in the details.
It's interesting that Laffer just cited one of the most famous socialists of all time.
And the details here are: communist governments can put in good economic policies. Capitalist governments can put in good economic policies. Socialist governments cannot. They believe in redistribution. And I think if we use our old definition of socialism, you and I, Richard, I think that's the way we'd talk about it. Whether it's state-run governments or whether it's democracy, tax cuts work.
Like, again, socialism isn't about redistributing wealth, though that can certainly be a part of a socialist system. Socialism is primarily about the relationship between worker and capital. That's what it's all about. Okay.
And Jack Ma is a perfect example of a lowly worker. I'm just joking. The wealth and the billionaires, as you said, that are coming out of China are coming out of a communist China where income redistribution and income inequality is huge in China. It's huge. And that's because of the state-run enterprises freeing it and allowing progress to occur. And I love your arguments, by the way, and thank you for letting me, because you got me all excited, because I think we both have the same vision of a world, and we just have two different ways of getting to it. I want to really bring in the capitalist system with constraints, and you want to bring in a worker's view of the world, which I understand and have been taught very heavily. And thank you for the debate.
Have you?
I don't think he understands, chat. I think it's been an hour and a half long conversation. I don't think he understands at all what Richard Wolff was talking about through most of it.
Have you two ever met? You both went to Stanford. What one did here? Have you?
Yeah, as soon
you
as
sound
I
like
came
old
into
friends.
the econ department, he left. He left, and as soon as I left Yale, he went there. So he has been avoiding me for something like 83 years. He's 81, I'm 83. So he's been avoiding me for 81 years. And now that I know where he lives and I have his...
Also, damn, Richard Wolff is 81 years old. Dude looks pretty good for 81. I'm not gonna lie. I was thinking like late 60s. You know?
His contact info. He is about to be inundated with visitations and discussions with Professor Laffer.
Well,
Sorry about that, Richard.
Let me first of all conclude by thanking you, David, for arranging this
Thank
and
you.
for taking the initiative to have this kind of conversation. I don't know how much light versus heat we generated, but we made our effort. And you're the person who gets the credit for making this event happen.
Yes, that's true. Great.
I'm a fly in the wall of two great thinkers having a great discussion. So I appreciate just being here, as does our audience. So I thank you both for doing this.
I wanted to end
Yes.
by making a deal with Art. I will read and review his book if he takes a look at one of mine called Democracy at Work, A Cure
Hell
for
yeah.
Capitalism, because that
I would
makes
love
the
to.
argument,
I
that
would love
makes
to.
the argument in detail that we had to kind of be summary about in the time limits of David's program.
I will do it and you would do the other, and I would love that.
All right.
Is this
I have
new?
a feeling I'm going to like your
Yeah, this is from about 3 months ago. Hey, Chelsea Storm.
book a lot. And I think we think very much along the same lines. It's just how we get
No,
to
you
where
don't.
the nirvana
You
that we
evil
both want to get
motherfucker.
to. And I
Just for the audience, where can we learn more about your current work now? Professor Wolff, I'll start with you. You mentioned you have a book and your program. You have a TV program as well?
Yes, there are 2 websites and a TV program. The websites are the following: Democracy at Work, all one word, .info. So the first website, democracyatwork.info. The second website, rdwolff.me.com, and that's Wolf spelled WOLFF. And finally, I do a weekly radio and television program called Economic Update, which you can find. It's aired about 100 radio stations.
I would recommend Economic Update, by the way. It's a good YouTube show. You can watch it on YouTube. I watch it. I like it. So would recommend that.
across the
I would just maybe ignore some of his foreign policy takes. Generally he's pretty good, but sometimes he falls into some wacky territory when he goes off economics as a topic.
country, goes out
Sometimes,
to 50 million
not
people
always.
on free speech TV and other networks. And finally, you can find us, Democracy at Work, or and me on YouTube, where all of our work is posted. So it's easy to find what we do and to see these kinds of arguments developed.
Dr. Laffer, where can we read more of your thoughts?
You know, the central one there is laffercenter.org, would be there. I'm also on TV all the time, all across the station, MSNBC, CBS, and CNN, Fox, all of them across the board there. You can look up any of those there. But the one you may want to look at is Hillsdale, the course on macroeconomics. My lectures there, which I would go through all of the macroeconomics and cover a lot of the topics that we've discussed here. And you can get my books. You can look them up on Amazon and all that.
All right. We'll put the links in the description down below, so make sure to follow both Professor Richard Wolff and Dr. Art Laffer in the description. Links in the description down below. Thank you very much, gentlemen, both of you. I don't want to hold up too much more of your time, so we'll end it here. Appreciate it. We'll do this again. It was fun. Thank you.
David, it was great fun. Richard, thanks, fun. Very much fun.
Same here.
Talk to you both later.
Appreciate the tone as well as the content.
And the respect I have for you is enormous.
Thank you. All right. Have a great day, gentlemen. Thank you.
That was really great. My goodness. For those of you asking, that was moderated by David Lin. Which you can check out on YouTube, the David Lin Report. There you go. Wow, that was really cathartic. Like, I enjoyed that to such a great degree. You guys have no idea. Like, watching the guy who fucked American and global economics into the state it is today get reamed by a socialist was real fun.